Whispers of Runeterra.
Death in Runeterra. When your heart stops in this world, what actually happens next? Do you vanish into nothing, reincarnate, rise again as undead, become a god's pawn, or fall into something far worse? Essentially, every realm and every culture on Runeterra has a different answer, and many of them are simultaneously true. So, how did death become this fractured, immensely powerful system instead of a single peaceful afterlife? In order to understand it, you need a guided tour through the moments, places, and entities that decide the fate of souls. In this video, you're going to get a compressed, chronological, region-by-region breakdown of what happens when mortals, champions, and even gods die. We will move from the earliest spirit beliefs to the ruination, then into modern catastrophes and cosmic forces. By the end, if you point at almost any character in Runeterra, you should be able to predict their most likely afterlife. First, imagine the black mist rolling off the Shadow Isles, swallowing a coastal village in Bilgewater. The living suffocate in spectral fog, and their souls are dragged screaming toward Thresh's lantern. Is that death, or just the beginning of being harvested, tormented, and recycled during every harrowing? Then, in another corner of the world, Kindred's bow and jaws quietly stalk a single dying soldier, offering a swift arrow or a slow, inevitable chase. Which fate would you receive? Far away in Shurima, ancient ascended lie in forgotten tombs, their once radiant bodies twisted into darkened weapons, their souls trapped instead of released. In the deserts beyond, void rifts tear open, and anything that falls in is not reborn as a ghost at all, but unmade into alien thought and hunger. I'm only speculating here, but for many scholars, oblivion in the void is the only true end Runeterra offers. High above, Mount Targon burns with celestial starfire. When an aspect's mortal host dies, does the human pass on while the godlike fragment simply moves to a new vessel, or are they fused forever in some higher realm? Meanwhile, in Ionia, death can mean slipping sideways into spirit realms where nature, demons, and ancestral echoes all compete for your lingering essence. This is not just scattered lore trivia. It is a full, interconnected system. Who finds peace, who suffers torment, who is recycled as a weapon, and who gets stuck between realms. Massive events, especially the Ruination, literally rewrote the rules, turning the Blessed Isles' gentle transition of souls into the Shadow Isles' industrial-scale undeath. In current times, we will move fast, with clearly labelled segments and direct explanations. Shadow Isles, Shurima, Ionia, Targon, the Void, and more. Each stop will answer 3 questions: what their people believe, what actually happens, and how exceptions like champions and gods break the pattern. Stay through to the end, and death in Runeterra will stop being a mystery and become a map. Our tour begins where the rules were shattered most violently, the Ruination and the birth of the Black Mist. Cosmic ground rules: souls, spirits, and true death. But in order to understand why the Ruination was so wrong, you first need the normal rulebook. What is a person in Runeterra before the Black Mist ever touches them? Essentially, every being has 3 layers: a physical body, the animating spark of life, and a deeper soul or spirit that can persist when the body fails. The body is obvious: flesh, bone, or whatever counts as matter in that realm. The animating life force is the raw vitality that keeps it moving, a kind of basic magic shared by mortals, beasts, and even plants. The soul is different. It's the pattern of memory, will, and identity that can echo long after the heart stops. When you die in Runeterra, those 3 parts do not vanish at once. Death here is a process, not a simple off switch. First, the body fails and the life force disperses back into the world. Then, the soul separates and faces a crossroads. So, how did ancient philosophers explain that crossroads? They believed souls were routed along different paths, depending on where they died, what powers claimed them, and what bargains they had made in life. This is where we have to separate spirits from ghosts. A spirit in Runeterra is usually tied to a place, emotion, or idea. A river spirit, a foxfire trickster, the storm that remembers sailors. These entities might never have been human at all, or they've dissolved so far from their original lives that only a theme remains. Ghosts and the undead are something else entirely. Those are souls that should have moved on but are bound unnaturally to the mortal realm, often stuffed back into rotting bodies, armour, or even weapons. Under normal circumstances, one immensely powerful pair of entities manages this traffic: kindred, lamb, and wolf. They are the personification of death in Runeterra, the answer to the question, who comes for you at the end? Lamb offers a peaceful arrow and a quiet passing. Wolf chases those who run, tearing them down with brutal joy. In current times, most souls should end in their care, claimed cleanly and sent beyond any map mortals know. But that's the ideal. The reality is much messier. The void can erase a soul so completely that there is no ghost, no spirit, just absence. Demons feed on fear, pain, and temptation, hooking themselves into a person's essence long before death, then dragging that soul into nightmare realms afterward. The ruination wraps souls in black mist and refuses to let them go, while celestial aspects on Targon overwrite mortal identities with star-born purpose. I'm only speculating here, but you can think of kindred as the default operating system, and all these other forces as hacks and viruses. Each time they interfere, they create an abnormal afterlife, wraith legions, cursed weapons, living constellations. Our next step is to watch one of those hacks happen in real time. The fall of the Blessed Isles and the birth of the Shadow Isles, where death stopped being an exit and became a prison. Before history, creation, spirits, and the first deaths. Before history, before empires and rune wars, death was already written into the code of the cosmos. Aurelion's soul was out there, forging stars. To him, entire galaxies were toys, arrangements of light and gravity he could bend at a whim. So, how did Runeterra appear in a universe where a dragon crafts constellations for fun? Essentially, it showed up as an anomaly, a world saturated with wild magic, split between a physical realm and a spirit realm, watched over by immensely powerful entities the Targonian Celestials did not fully control. Runeterra's creation is usually tied to the world runes and unknown shapers, but from the very beginning, one rule was clear: mortal life would be finite. In order to understand death here, you have to understand kindred. Wherever a thinking being learns two things, fear of dying and acceptance of it, the lamb and the wolf appear. They are not a late addition. They are the built-in exit function of this world. A yordle in some distant forest, a proto-human on a newborn continent, even an ancient Vastayan chieftain, once they can imagine their end, kindred is already waiting. At the same time, the spirit realm birthed its own gods of motion and change. Nagakaboros, the great serpent worshipped in Bilgewater in current times, is one of the oldest of these. She is not a goddess of peace or stillness. She demands constant motion, growth, struggle. Death, to her, is not a failure. It is a turn in the spiral, one more wave in an endless ocean of rebirth and action. A soul that stops, that clings, that refuses to move on, that is the real blasphemy. This is a very different view from static heavens or frozen hells you might expect. But not every entity in the spirit realm saw mortals as part of a grand cycle. Some saw them as food. Early demons, true demons, not just dark mages, coalesced around primal emotions. Fear gave form to things like fiddlesticks. Obsession, despair, and pain would later shape others, such as Evelyn or Ashlesh. These beings do not merely kill you, they savour what you feel on the way to death. I'm only speculating here, but this suggests a terrifying rule. The flavour of your soul depends on the life you led. Die in terror, rage, or heartbreak, and you may attract predators tailored to that emotion. So from the start, Runeterra is a contested afterlife ecosystem. Kindred offers a clean passing. Nagakaboros pulls souls back into motion. Demons lurk, waiting for the worst moments in mortal hearts. As soon as the first tribes, then cities, then empires rise, they notice this pattern. What if you could dodge kindred? What if you could bottle motion or bind a demon or rewrite the terms of your own ending? That is when mortals begin to cheat. And when mortals fight death itself, the afterlife stops being simple and starts becoming a battlefield. Foundational powers, kindred, demons, and spirit, gods. Foundational powers, kindred, demons, and spirit gods. Once mortals begin cheating death, you need to know who they're actually cheating. At the centre of Runeterra's entire death system stands kindred. Essentially, kindred is not one being but two, lamb and wolf, a single, immensely powerful entity wearing two faces. Lamb is the white-hooded archer who offers a calm, clean end to those who accept their fate. Wolf is the shadow that chases anyone who runs. So, how did this duality shape what happens when you die? In most regions, if a mortal's life reaches its natural conclusion, or their spirit accepts that it's over, Lamb's arrow finds them. Death is instant, merciful, almost gentle. But if they deny it, if they cling to life through terror or stubbornness, then Wolf hunts. His kill is violent, chaotic, and terrifying, and the story says he enjoys the chase far more than the catch. However, kindred is only the default. Runeterra is crowded with other entities that feed on the moment between life and death. Demons are one of the most dangerous categories. They are not just monsters, they are incarnations of specific emotions. In order to exist, they must feast on fear, pain, obsession, or despair, twisting events so those feelings peak right as a mortal dies. Fiddlesticks is fear-given form, an ancient scarecrow thing that appears where terror is thickest. It doesn't simply kill. It toys with minds, stretches out the moment of panic, so the fear is richer when it finally strikes. Evelyn, on the other hand, is agony. She seduces, isolates, and then tortures her victims, savouring every scream, shaping their deaths into a banquet of suffering. I'm only speculating here, but if you die in one of Evelyn's torture chambers, kindred may arrive to find there's almost nothing left to claim. Then you have spirit gods, regional arbiters that bend the rules for entire cultures. Nagakaboros, worshipped around Bilgewater and the Serpent Isles, is the great serpent of motion. To her, stagnation is worse than death. A soul that keeps moving, fighting, changing, earns her favour. A soul that clings to stillness is an offence. In current times, champions like Ilaoi act as her priests, testing whether mortals, and even ghosts, are still worthy of motion, and those are only the names we know. The lore repeatedly hints that there are countless more demons and spirits across the spirit realm, unseen judges and predators of the dead. Many afterlife outcomes are never described, which means that for most mortals, the exact destination of their soul is a mystery. So when someone dies in Runeterra, think of a crossroads. By default, kindred stands there, but a demon might have already fed on their last emotion. A god like Nagakaboros might drag them into a trial, or a magical catastrophe, the black mist, a void rift, a darkened weapon might intercept them entirely. The next major force to rewrite death will come from one of those catastrophes. How we'll track death, timelines, regions and rules. So in order to make sense of all these crossroads, we need a map, not just of the world of Runeterra, but of time itself. That's where the rise of Noxus becomes our anchor. We'll measure history in rough eras, BN before Noxus, and AN after Noxus, to keep the chaos of gods, empires and magical disasters in some kind of order. Essentially, you can imagine a long line running from the most ancient mythic ages to the tense political present. On the far left, long before Noxus, you have the Freljord's War of the Three Sisters, Shurima's Golden Age and Ascension, and Targon's celestial interventions. On the far right, in current times, you have Noxian legions marching into Ionia, Piltover and Zarn, racing ahead with Hextech, and the Shadow Isles spilling their deathly influence into Bilgewater. So how did we get from one end to the other? We'll move through that line in sequence. First, the mythic foundations. How death worked when ancient entities, watchers and aspects first began rewriting the rules of mortality. Then the cataclysms, the ruination, void incursions, darkin wars and rune wars tearing holes in the boundary between realms. Finally, we arrive in the modern age where nations like Demacia, Noxus and Ionia try to control death's power and usually fail. But we're not just following time, we're crossing regions, and each region has its own death culture. On the Shadow Isles, death is not an ending but an infection. Undeath is sustained by the black mist, and souls can be trapped, tormented or weaponized. In Ionia, death is supposed to be a gentle transition in a balanced spirit realm, watched over by orders like the Kinku. In Shurima, Ascension lets a few mortals transcend death entirely, becoming god warriors, while everyone else returns to sand and memory. Demacia will give us another pattern, a realm that fears magic so deeply it builds its entire identity around Petricite, stone that drinks spells and spirits alike. What happens to a mage's soul when even their death is suppressed? I'm only speculating here, but that question haunts Demacia's history. Meanwhile, Noxus embraces death in war as proof of strength, Piltover and Zarn treat it as collateral damage of progress, and Targon turns death into a doorway for aspects to descend. For each major arc, we'll keep 3 questions in front of you. First, what normally happens when you die there? What's the default path for a soul in that culture? Second, what broke that system? Was it a ruination, a void rift, a darkin weapon, or a political decision? And third, which champions embody that story in their own deaths and afterlives? By the time we reach the present AN era, you'll see these different afterlives starting to collide. What happens when the black mist rolls into Ionia's spirit forests, or when a void incursion hits a Demacian petricite wall? Events like the Harrowing turn those questions into global crises, and that's where we're heading next. Ancient Freljord, the first frozen afterlives. To see how far death in Runeterra can be twisted, you have to go somewhere even harsher than the Shadow Isles. The ancient Freljord. Before kingdoms, before banners, it was a frozen frontier where mortals fought not only the cold, but spirits, iceborne sorcery and titanic entities pressing in from outside reality itself. Around these early ages, the Northern Realm is a battlefield of tribes and elementals. Blizzards are not just weather, they're semi-conscious spirits. Glaciers, remember, in this world, dying of exposure or in a raid is almost merciful. So, how did something worse than death appear here first? It begins with 3 immensely powerful sisters. Avarosa, Cyrilda and Lysandra are ancient witches who managed to defeat some of the old gods of the north and unite much of the Freljord. In order to protect their people from the endless winter and from rival entities, They search for a greater power beneath the ice. Lysandra is the one who truly listens. Far below, she encounters the Watchers, vast, void-adjacent beings, pushing their will into the world through the cold. The pact they forge is not a simple bargain of life and death. The Watchers promise to end all suffering by rewriting existence into perfect, frozen stillness. Lysandra presents this as salvation, while Avarosa and Cyrilda eventually see it as annihilation. Their feud, remembered as the War of the Three Sisters, is not just a civil war. It is a war over what death and afterlife will mean for the Freljord. When the Watcher's influence touches mortals, normal death stops being the end point. Those claimed by their power are frozen mid-moment, bodies encased in true ice that does not melt, souls suspended in a kind of cosmic stasis. Some are twisted into jagged, half-living constructs, their minds muffled but not fully gone. Others are partially consumed by that outer corruption, becoming things that no longer fit the world's rules. Essentially, you get a spectrum of fates. Warriors locked forever in the pose of their last charge, seers whose thoughts echo endlessly in the ice, and monstrosities that serve as conduits for the Watcher's will. I'm only speculating here, but many of them may be aware enough to know they cannot move, cannot die, and cannot be reborn. Because of this, Freljordian culture develops a very sharp contrast. To fall in battle, be burned on a pyre, and be remembered in song is an honour. To vanish under an avalanche of true ice, or to be dragged into a hidden vault beneath the howling abyss, is a horror. Which would you choose, a brief glorious end or an eternity as a frozen thought? In current times you still see these ancient bargains echoing through champions. Lysandra walks the world as a living agent of that frozen afterlife, quietly maintaining the prisons where the Watchers sleep. Ash carries Avarosa's legacy of remembrance and mortal honour. Sejuani, invoking Cyrilda's brutal strength, leads a people who would rather die charging than be entombed. And the real threat, if the Watchers fully awaken and emerge, their version of afterlife could overwrite death itself across Runeterra, turning the entire world into a single unmoving tomb. Our next stops will show how other forces, the Void, the Shadow Isles and mortal empires, might collide with that possibility. The Watchers and the Void. Death as non-existence. If the Watchers threaten to freeze death into a single eternal moment, the Void aims for something even more disturbing. No moment at all. Not endless suffering. Not a cursed afterlife. Just the removal of you from the story of the world. So, how did Runeterra end up with a fate that is worse than dying and worse than undeath? To answer that, you need to understand what the Void actually is. The Void is not just another dark realm or underworld. It is an alien nothingness, a pressure from outside reality that wants to erase form, thought, and memory. Essentially, it is anti-existence, a place where even concepts go to die. In order to grasp what happens when something is consumed by the Void, you have to think beyond ghosts and spirits. When a soul is claimed by the black mist, it can linger as a wraith. When a mortal falls to Mordekaiser, their essence is dragged into his metallic necropolis. But when a person is devoured by a Void creature, there is strong evidence that no such continuity remains. No ghost, no afterimage in any spirit realm, just absence. Take Vel'Koz. His entire purpose is to disintegrate matter and information, breaking things down to their most basic patterns so the Void can learn and then unmake more efficiently. When he disintegrates a victim, you are not seeing a dramatic kill animation. You are watching memory, identity, and magic be stripped apart. I'm only speculating here, but it is very possible that what remains is reprocessed as raw Void stuff, the same essence that shapes horrors in the deep rifts. Kha'Zix offers a different flavour of ending. He consumes to evolve. Each prey he devours is not just nutrition, it is adaptation. The implication is chilling. What made you unique may survive only as a stat boost, a sharper claw, a stronger carapace. Your soul does not stand before kindred or enter a distant realm. It becomes an upgrade screen for an inhuman predator. Then there is Icathia, the most catastrophic example. When that ancient city tore open a rift in defiance of Shurima, the void did not simply kill its people, it warped them. Entire armies and landscapes were twisted into void-born constructs, things that move and fight, but whose original selves are gone. In current times, mutated remnants and crystalline horrors still crawl there, proof that the void can overwrite life on a massive scale. Contrast this with the Shadow Isles. In that realm, death is warped into undeath, and you suffer forever as a conscious spirit, tormented by Thresh, driven by Viego, bound by curses that never end. In the void, you might envy even that torment, because there may be no you left to feel anything at all. So which is worse? Eternal agony as an aware soul, or perfect, silent oblivion where you never even realise you're gone? Runeterra offers both options, depending on where you fall, and next you'll see how the Shadow Isles turn death into a prison that might one day collide with the void's hunger. Shurima's Ascension. When death makes you a god. If the Shadow Isles turned death into a cage, Shurima tried something even bolder, removing death from the equation entirely, not by healing, but by burning mortality away and replacing it with celestial power. So, how did that actually work? At the heart of the empire stood the sun disk, a colossal golden construct shaped with Targonian guidance. During an ascension ritual, chosen mortals were raised beneath it and exposed to focused, star-born magic. The sun's radiance didn't just bless them, it incinerated their fragile bodies, stripping away weakness until only a refined, enduring essence remained. Essentially, a human frame was overwritten by a god-warrior form. Nasus, Renekton, Sataka and others emerged as towering, immensely powerful entities. They were Shurima's living weapons, guardians and symbols of divine favour. In order to control a vast desert realm and repel void-touched threats from Icathia, the Empire needed champions who could outlast armies and shrug off wounds that would annihilate normal mortals. To Shurimans, this was the ultimate victory over death. Your body ended once, in sacred fire, and you never had to fear ordinary dying again. But there was a problem. Ascended are not truly immortal. They age slowly, resist disease, and are almost impossible to kill. Yet when one of these beings finally falls, no priest can say with certainty where that soul goes. Do they move on to a higher plane, or does their immense power anchor them unnaturally to the world? I'm only speculating here, but the later Darkins suggest that an Ascended's consciousness can linger twisted long after a body is gone. Failure was even worse. Not everyone exposed to the sun disk completed the transformation. Some were burned, half remade, and left as warped, agonized creatures. For them, death became something you could neither reach nor escape. So, how do you pray for release when the ritual meant to save you from mortality has locked you into a broken form? All of this reached a breaking point with Zerath. Once a mortal mage and Azir's slave, he hijacked the ascension meant for his emperor. The ritual overloaded. Instead of a controlled elevation, the sun disk detonated in magical shockwaves. Azir's body was obliterated mid-ascension. Zerath burst into a disembodied arcane being, and the heart of Shurima collapsed into ruin. That single betrayal shattered an empire and scattered its dead. The desert filled with half-living remnants, sand wraiths, cursed guardians, and spirits unable to find any proper afterlife. Azir would later claw his way back as a spectral, sand-bound emperor, neither fully alive nor comfortably dead. In current times, you still see the echoes. Amumu wanders as an eternally undying child king, bound to grief instead of a grave. Zerath exists as raw, chained energy. Shurima tried to beat death, and in doing so multiplied strange, partial afterlives across the realm. And they weren't the only ones to invite that outcome. On another distant shore, a different empire would reach for immortality through pure spirit magic and tear its own island out of the cycle of life and death entirely. Icathia's fall, choosing the void over a mortal death. Icathia shows you what happens when an entire nation decides that a normal death is not enough. On Runeterra's eastern edges, Icathia was once a proud ancient kingdom forced under Shuriman rule. So, how did they plan to break free from an empire of sun-born god warriors? They turned to something even more immensely powerful than ascended armies, the void, the cold, alien realm beneath reality itself. In order to win a single rebellion, Icathian leaders opened vast rifts and invited the void in as a weapon. They knew it was catastrophic magic. They knew it would not stop at Shuriman soldiers, but they gambled that obliteration was better than continued submission. Essentially, they chose annihilation over ordinary conquest. The aftermath was not a clean destruction. It was a corruption. Cities didn't just fall, they warped. Stone flowed like flesh. Towers bent toward impossible angles. People caught near the rifts were twisted into void-touched abominations, half mortal, half nightmare, no longer fitting any clear definition of life or death. The land itself became a wound in reality, a place where the two realms, material and void, bled into each other. In that transformed Icathia, dying in the old sense became rare. Bodies were consumed, reshaped, or simply unmade. Souls that might once have gone on to a spirit afterlife were dragged back, pinned into living husks, or dissolved into the hungry emptiness. What does it mean to die when the thing you become doesn't age, doesn't truly heal, and can't properly pass on? Icathia turned that question into geography. In current times, you mostly see Icathia through its inheritors. Kassadin is a widower and father who ventures into the ruined region, loses his family to the spreading corruption, and ends up fusing himself with void artifacts just to survive long enough for revenge. Malzahar is a wandering prophet who stares into Icathia's rift and comes back as the void's chosen herald, guiding mortals toward their own unmaking. Kaisar is a child swallowed by a collapsing cavern, surviving only because a void creature carapace bonds to her. All three show different ways the void hijacks mortal destinies, turning grief, faith, and sheer survival into tools of an inhuman power. I'm only speculating here, but Icathia raises a terrifying possibility for what happens when you die to the void. Did some Icathian souls slip away into normal afterlives before the corruption fully spread, or did the void claim almost all of them, erasing not just a people but their dead, their memory, their place in the spiritual order of the world? That question matters because Icathia was not the last time Runeterra tore holes into deeper horrors. Far to the north, another civilization would pierce the unknown and invite the void to stare back. Targon and the aspects, dying to become a star. Far above those northern void rents, another wound in the sky offers a very different kind of death. Mount Targon is not just a mountain, it is a bridge. Mortals who climb it are not simply risking their lives to reach a summit. They are walking into the sight line of celestial entities that do not think the way you do. So, how did Targon become a place where dying can mean promotion to the stars? In ancient ages, the aspects, immensely powerful embodiments of concepts like the sun, the moon, war, protection, anchored themselves around this peak. The climb is brutal. Most mortals who attempt it freeze, fall, or simply collapse. their bodies giving out long before the top. But that is the point. Their willpower pushed to the edge of death is what draws an aspect's attention. When an aspect chooses a host, the real death may not be the body at all. It is the self. Essentially, the mortal mind can be overwritten, merged, or pressed into a quiet corner while the aspect takes the wheel. The body survives, or is remade, but it becomes a vessel for cosmic power rather than a purely human life. In order to understand what that means, you can look at the different champions tied to Targon. Leona, chosen by the aspect of the sun, is one of the clearer cases of coexistence. Her mortal compassion and the sun's relentless judgment are both present, wrestling for control of the same soul. Diana, bearing the aspect of the moon, experiences a similar duality. A human woman whose anger and faith are amplified by an ancient lunar force. I'm only speculating here, but in both of them you can still hear a human voice beneath the armour and the magic. Pantheon is what happens when that balance snaps. Atreus climbed Targon and was almost entirely overwritten by the aspect of war. For a time, Pantheon was not a man at all, but a god wearing flesh. When Atreus's body was shattered in battle and the aspect abandoned him, the mortal will clawed its way back, proving that the human part had never fully died. Tarik, aspect of the Protector, sits somewhere between those examples. His disgrace and exile from Demetia are still his, but his purpose has been rewritten on a cosmic scale. So what happens when these vessels finally fall? When an aspect host dies physically, the celestial being usually returns to its distant realm, waiting for another worthy or desperate climber. The mortal soul's fate is far murkier. Sometimes it is honoured as a saint of Targon, remembered in rites and constellations. Sometimes it is so fused with the aspect that no one, not even kindred, may clearly separate where human ended and star being began. Compared to the more grounded afterlives of the Shadow Isles or the spirit realm of Ionia, Targon offers transcendence. You do not just die, you are invited to participate in the machinery of the cosmos, but the cost is your individuality, your memories, the small details that made you, you. Is becoming a fragment of a god a better fate than an ordinary death? Or is it another kind of erasure? In current times, that question matters, because Targon's aspects are not the only higher powers rewriting what death means. Elsewhere on Runeterra, entire nations are reshaping the boundary between life, magic, and memory in much more mortal ways. Bandle City and Yordles, when death stops making sense. But just as you start to map out clear rules for souls and afterlives, Runeterra throws you a curveball. There is an entire people for whom death, time, and even space refuse to behave. To understand that, you have to leave the mortal world and step toward Bandle City. Yordles are not simply small, fuzzy mortals. They are spiritual beings, native to a hidden realm that overlaps Runeterra but does not fully belong to it. Essentially, Bandle City is a nexus of raw, whimsical magic, and Yordles are its citizens given form. They can manifest in the material realm, eat, sleep, and be wounded, but their true selves are anchored somewhere else entirely. So, how did that change the rules of dying? In order to answer that, you have to separate a Yordle's body from their essence. On a battlefield in Piltover or the Freljord, a Yordle can be shot, frozen, or incinerated. To human eyes, they die there. Yet, very often, the animating spark that is their real being recoils back toward Bandle City, or lingers half-phased between realms in ways mortals can barely perceive. Heimerdinger is one of the clearest examples. This Yordle scientist has watched Piltover rise from experimental outpost to gleaming Hextech capital. Generations of human partners, rivals, and students have grown old and died around him while he remains energetic, brilliant, and only mildly frazzled. His apparent age barely shifts, hinting at an ancient lifespan that makes the Noxian-Ionian War feel like a brief laboratory accident. Tristana offers another angle. As the Yordle who studies mortal wars in order to defend Bandle City, she has seen countless sieges and last stands. She fights on the front lines, takes wounds that would kill any soldier, and yet endures with a kind of stubborn resilience that borders on the supernatural. I'm only speculating here, but it suggests that critical injury for a Yordle is more a question of how tightly they are tethered to this realm than how damaged their body is. Then you have Viger, the tiny master of evil, who has been imprisoned, released, and steeped in dark celestial magic over centuries. His mind has twisted, but he has not withered. Time scars his personality more than his flesh. For him, and many other Yordles, the concept of a final, irreversible end is distant, almost theoretical. How do you fear death when your friends vanish into portals and come back decades later having barely changed? This has a quiet, unsettling consequence. When a Yordle watches a Demacian knight fall or sees Zornite workers poisoned by Chemtech, they are observing a kind of tragedy that does not truly exist in Bandle City. Mortal suffering is real to them, but it is also alien, filtered through an immortal's perspective. And this is your pattern interrupt. Just when Runeterra's system of souls, gods, and afterlives starts to feel consistent, Yordles remind you that some immensely powerful entities simply do not fit the model. In current times, that matters because the next realms we visit will push these contradictions even further. The Blessed Isles, inventing a gentle afterlife. So, how did Runeterra ever get a version of death that wasn't terrifying? For a brief moment in its ancient history, that answer was the Blessed Isles. Far from Shurima's deserts and Noxus's future battlefields, the Blessed Isles were a sanctuary. Imagine a realm where scholars, mages, and priests worked together not to cheat death but to understand it. Towering libraries recorded every known funerary rite. Silent cloisters studied spirits the way others studied stars. In order to grasp the full contrast with the ruination, you need to see that this place was built on the idea that the end of a mortal's life could be gentle, ordered, and even beautiful. At the centre of it all was a single, impossible phenomenon, the waters of life. This was no ordinary spring. It was a font of concentrated, reality-bending magic drawn from deep beneath the Isles. The waters could heal mortal wounds, preserve failing bodies, and, most dangerously, interact directly with souls. Essentially, it was contact with the spirit realm without the usual corruption, at least at first. The caretakers of the Isles believed that, handled carefully, this power could ease the passage between life and death instead of ripping it open. So, how did they use that? The Isles developed rituals that turned death into a carefully managed transition. Bodies were washed in diluted waters, not to resurrect them, but to stabilize the soul's last moments. Priests and spirit mages guided the dying through visions, ensuring they did not cling in fear or rage. I'm only speculating here, but this probably reduced the number of angry ghosts and wraiths that appeared elsewhere in the world. Where Noxian battlefields would later spawn howling shades, the Blessed Isles produced quiet remembrance and cleanly passing spirits. Champions you know from in-game stories once walked under that system as ordinary mortals. Callista, before she was a spectral spear of vengeance, was a Camavoran general who believed that honourable service led to honourable rest. Hekarim, long before he became the shadow of war, rode as a knight expecting that when he fell, his soul would be commended to a peaceful beyond. To them, the Blessed Isles were not horror, they were the promise that their sacrifices would not end in torment. Can you see how radically different that is from the Shadow Isles you know in current times? For centuries this balance held. The waters of life were used sparingly, the archives grew, and the afterlife, at least for those who reached these shores, remained ordered and merciful. But no system in Runeterra is immune to obsession. All it took was one grieving king, one refusal to accept a single death, to turn this sanctuary into a disaster zone of souls. And when he arrived, the waters answered, just not in the way anyone expected. The ruination, when one death broke an entire afterlife. Viego of Camavor walked into that sanctuary as a grieving husband. He walked out as the epicenter of the greatest spiritual disaster Runeterra has ever seen. In order to understand undeath in this realm, you have to understand the moment his love story detonated an entire afterlife. Viego was a young king, unprepared for rule and utterly consumed by his queen, Isolde. When an assassin's poisoned blade struck her, he could not accept that Kindred's arrow had found its mark. So, how did a private tragedy reach all the way to the Blessed Isles? Every rumour, every legend of a cure pointed to one place, the waters of life, guarded by Helia's sages and their ancient, immensely powerful archives. The Isles did not give such power freely. By their laws, the waters were meant to heal the living, not drag the dead back across the veil. But Viego's obsession overrode caution. Through bribery, coercion, and Thresh's subtle manipulation from within the Order, the king's retinue forced access to the reliquary beneath Helia, where a world rune's presence quietly amplified every spell cast nearby. There, in a forbidden ritual, the waters of life were poured over Isolde's preserved corpse. This was not resurrection. It was an act of spiritual violence. The waters tried to answer two opposing commands at once: restore life and respect death. Reality tore. A hole opened between realms, and catastrophic magic surged outward. Essentially, the ruination was the waters screaming in both directions at once. In an instant, almost every mortal on the Isles died, their bodies blackened, their souls ripped free before Kindred could guide them onward. But instead of dispersing into the ordered afterlife, those souls were caught, twisted, and fused into a new phenomenon, the Black Mist. I'm only speculating here, but you can imagine the world rune beneath Helia acting as a broken lens, refracting every departing spirit back into a churning storm of undeath. Thresh, once a meticulous warden of dangerous artifacts and memories, was transformed by this failure of the system he had served. The ruination unshackled his sadism. No longer just cataloguing echoes of the dead, he became an active jailer of souls, empowered to chain, torment, and harvest them within the mist. What had been an archive turned into a prison, and Thresh eagerly took the role of its cruel master. From that moment onward, the Blessed Isles ceased to exist. In their place stood the Shadow Isles, a wound in the world where death does not resolve, it lingers. Dying near these shores no longer means an ending, but often the beginning of eternal undeath and torment. Spirits such as Hecarim's cavalry, Callista's vengeful shade, and countless nameless ghosts now cycle through endless agony. In current times, every harrowing, every surge of black mist reaching Bilgewater or beyond is the ruination still echoing forward, and the rest of Runeterra has no choice but to live and die under its shadow. The Black Mist. How souls get trapped, twisted, and used to understand that shadow. You need to understand the Black Mist itself. This is not ordinary fog. It is a magical, semi-sentient shroud radiating out from the ruined isles, saturated with billions of corrupted souls. During a harrowing, it spills across the sea and into coastal cities, an invading realm of undeath sliding over the living world of Runeterra. So, how did it become so hungry for souls? When the ruination detonated, the waters of life, a world rune, and Viego's grief fused into a single catastrophe. Essentially, the boundary between life and death around the Blessed Isles shattered. Instead of souls dispersing into the spirit realm, they were dragged into this new storm of necromantic power and bound together into one immense roiling consciousness, the Black Mist. When someone dies in or near that mist, their fate changes instantly. Normally, kindred would appear, and lamb and wolf would guide or chase your soul onward. Inside the harrowing's reach, that process is violently interrupted. Your soul is yanked away from kindred's arrows and jaws, tangled in spectral chains, and folded into the fog's undead ecosystem. You do not pass on. You are repurposed. In order to weaponize this, certain entities within the mist have learned to shape it. Thresh is the clearest example. Once a sadistic warden of Helia, undeath freed him from mortal limits, but not from cruelty. His lantern is a specialized prison forged from ruination magic and his own will. Each green flame you see is an individual soul, captured, preserved, and tormented indefinitely. There is no decay, no forgetting, no final sleep. As long as the lantern endures, those prisoners have no chance of rest. Callista shows another outcome. Betrayed and murdered, she returns as a spectral knight bound by oaths and resentment. Her form is coherent, her mind focused, but her purpose has been twisted. The mist holds her together as a weapon of vengeance. Hecarim, by contrast, is an armoured wraith fused to his cavalry, an entire charge of souls hammered into a single thundering horror. I'm only speculating here, but you can almost see the mist experimenting with different configurations of pain. Viego himself becomes the obsessed king at the heart of it all, a monarch whose will amplifies the harrowing. His refusal to let go keeps the cycle spinning. Gwen is stranger still, a doll animated by Isolde's lingering spirit, turned into a living relic. She is proof that fragments of love and memory can slip the mist's total control, but never fully escape its origin. In current times, this is the true horror of the Shadow Isles sphere. Death there is no longer a release. It is a state of weaponized suffering, stretched across centuries, sustained as long as the Black Mist exists. And as the harrowings grow bolder, you have to ask, what happens if that mist stops retreating and simply decides the entire world is its graveyard? Bilgewater and the harrowing, living with a broken afterlife. Next door for one city, that question isn't hypothetical at all. In Bilgewater, the edge of the world's worst afterlife disaster is just across the bay, and every few years it comes knocking. The harrowing is what mortals call those nights when the Black Mist does not stay politely around the Shadow Isles. It surges across the sea, rolling over ships and docks, seeping through shutters and lungs. So, how did people realise this wasn't just bad weather? Because the mist drags the dead out of their graves. Spectral crews reappear on long sunk hulls. Drowned sailors claw their way up through floorboards, and ghostly predators hunt anything still drawing breath. Dying during a harrowing is different from dying anywhere else in Runeterra. Normally your soul would drift into whatever realm answers your culture, your patron, or simply the pull of the spirit world. Here, there is no journey. The mist is already there. It tears you out of your body in the same instant your heart stops, claiming you before kindred's arrows or lambent lanterns from other entities can intervene. Essentially, the harrowing is a mass abduction of souls, denying them any regional afterlife at all. So, how did Bilgewater survive living next door to that? In order to keep existing, the city built a culture around it. Faith in Nagakaboros, the ancient serpent of motion, becomes more than philosophy here. It is survival doctrine. You keep moving, you keep changing, you do not stagnate in fear, because stillness is what the black mist wants. Harrowing nights are met with ritual, ships lashed together, wards painted in squid ink and blood, offerings cast into the sea so the Great Spirit will stir the currents and push the fog away. There is also a brutal pragmatism. People know that if someone dies in the streets during the harrowing, that same person may be pounding on the door an hour later with green fire in their eyes. Families in Bilgewater learn to mourn fast and to fight faster. I'm only speculating here, but this constant proximity to corrupted souls might be why Bilgewater's superstitions are so detailed. Who you can save, who you must immediately destroy, and who you dare to bargain with. Champions show you different responses to this broken cycle. Gangplank sees the Isles as a weapon. He trades with undead captains, sails into the mist, and treats the harrowing as another source of power to terrorize mortals. Misfortune, in contrast, turns the city into a fortress. After toppling Gangplank, she coordinates defences, studies patterns of the mist, and uses Bilgewater's pirate law to force cooperation whenever the dead rise. Yorick stands apart from both. As the last shepherd of souls from the Blessed Isles, he walks the ruined realm with his shovel and his eulogy of the Isles, trying to guide spirits on when no proper afterlife remains. In current times, Bilgewater is the test case for coexistence with a corrupted death. It negotiates, resists, and occasionally exploits the harrowing, all while knowing the system is fundamentally broken. And that raises a final, uneasy question. If one ruination rewrote death for an entire region, what happens if something similar spreads inland? Can the afterlife of the whole world of Runeterra be twisted the same way? Until nowhere is safe to die. Ionia, where death walks between worlds. If the Shadow Isles show you what happens when death is corrupted from the outside, Ionia shows you something stranger. A land where death was never fully separate from life to begin with. Here, the veil between realms isn't a wall, it's a doorway that never quite closes. Ionia exists in dual reality. There is the physical land of forests, monasteries, and battlefields, and there is the spirit realm layered directly on top of it. So, how did that happen? Long before Noxian steel ever touched its shores, Ionia's wild magic soaked into everything, trees, rivers, emotions, even memories, until ideas and feelings could manifest as tangible spirits. Essentially, every hill and village lives with a ghostly reflection, populated by entities born from nature and from the hearts of mortals. In such a place, dying does not always mean departing. When an Ionian dies in a sacred grove, on an ancient battlefield, or in a moment of overwhelming emotion, their soul can linger as a benign or neutral spirit. A devoted gardener might become a whisper in the cherry blossoms. A fallen monk could remain as a calm presence in a shrine. They are not all vengeful. Many simply continue, slightly out of phase, watching descendants, answering prayers, or drifting along old paths. In order to keep this coexistence from collapsing, the Kinku order was formed. Their purpose is balance, ensuring that the spirit realm does not flood into the material, and that mortals do not trample the spirits into oblivion. Shen, the Eye of Twilight, walks both realms at once, judging when a restless dead soul should be guided onward, and when a dangerous spirit must be confronted. I'm only speculating here, but you can imagine countless unseen judgments, where a single ghost spared or banished changes the fate of a village. Different champions show you different ways mortals interact with these dead-adjacent spirits. Akali, trained as the Fist of Shadow, once eliminated threats that disturbed this balance, including corrupted ghosts and murderous shades. Kennen, the Heart of the Tempest, carries storm power that races through spirit pathways as easily as through clouds, hunting entities that move too freely between realms. Karma, as the living avatar of the Ionian soul, carries the memories and wisdom of generations. Many past lives, many deaths, condensed into one guiding presence that mortals can actually speak to in current times. Then, Noxus invaded. Mass slaughter in places already saturated with magic tore holes in the veil. Battlefields such as the Placidium of Navori became scars where angry spirits and vengeful ghosts clustered around trauma. The more Noxus pushed, the more the spirit realm pushed back. Zed's Shadow Order weaponized this chaos, birthing shadow assassins, entities that are neither fully dead nor alive, shaped by hatred and fear. What happens when too many such beings form? The entire regional afterlife tilts toward violence, and that leads to a disturbing possibility. If Ionia's balance can fracture under mortal war, what happens in regions that never had balance at all? Spirits, rebirth and vengeance, Ionian. Afterlives in practice. In Ionia, that fracture doesn't just stay philosophical. It walks, whispers, and sometimes kills. When you die here, you're not simply leaving a body, you are entering a realm that overlaps every bamboo grove and temple courtyard. So, how did this turn into a weapon? Zed's Shadow Order is the clearest example. In order to fight Noxus, he embraced forbidden shadow magic rooted in the spirit realm's darker currents. Those shadows are not just tricks of light. They are shades, echoes of the dead, fragments of fear and rage bound to living assassins. Each kill can feed them. Each atrocity adds more raw material. Essentially, you get a feedback loop where war breeds shadow and shadow makes the next killing easier. But Ionian death is not only about corruption, it is also about return. Many Ionian philosophies accept a cycle of rebirth where a soul moves through lives to refine wisdom. The most famous case is Karma. Her soul is an ancient, recurring presence, reborn again and again into new mortal hosts. She remembers past lives as impressions and insights guiding entire generations. So when an Ionian dies, some believe they are not gone, but waiting to re-emerge, perhaps as a monk, a child, or even a future spiritual leader. That ideal, however, collides with the reality of war. The Noxian invasion left mass graves and ruined monasteries, and not every soul could follow the script. Vengeful spirits began to cluster around battlefields and burned villages. You see this in haunted shrines, restless ancestors, and localized anomalies where the veil is thin. A forest that whispers the names of the fallen. A river that refuses to reflect the living. These are afterlives that never fully detached from the world. In Ionia, dying does not necessarily mean leaving your homeland at all. Many souls remain woven into the landscape. Some become guardians, bound to sacred groves or ancient stones, protecting mortals who honour them. Others twist into predators, preying on travellers who disturb cursed ground. The result is a patchwork spiritual map. Every valley might hide a small personal afterlife, shaped by whatever happened there. I'm only speculating here, but that immense density of spirits may have a cost. When so many souls linger, external entities notice. Demons that feed on emotion can slip in more easily, where fear and grief already saturate the air. The black mist rolling in from the Shadow Isles could, in theory, find a richer harvest here than almost anywhere else on Runeterra. In current times, that raises a disturbing question. If Ionia is both sanctuary and graveyard, what happens when a foreign afterlife, Mordekaiser's realm, the Shadow Isles, even the Void, tries to claim those same souls? The answer depends on who reaches them first, and that struggle over the dead is becoming just as important as any war among the living. Noxus, glory, oblivion, and the politics of death. If Ionia is a battleground for souls, then Noxus is a forge. In this empire, death is not just an ending, it is a measurement of worth, of failure, of how much strength you actually had when it mattered. Noxus is built on a core philosophy, strength in all its forms, military strength, political strength, even the strength to endure humiliation and rise again. So, how did that shape the way you die in this realm? Essentially, if you fall in battle after proving your value, your death can be honoured. If you die as a coward or as a tool that broke too early, you are forgotten, or worse, erased from the story. In order to understand Noxian death, you have to see how public it is. Executions are not hidden away, they are staged. Heads on spikes, traitors paraded through the immortal bastion. Condemned officers, forced to face the crowd. These deaths are lessons, teaching mortals what happens when they challenge the Empire's power without the strength to win. The gladiatorial arenas push this even further. The arenas are theatres of mortality, where Noxus turns dying into spectacle. Draven embodies this perfectly. For him, every execution, every kill in the pit is performance. The condemned do not just lose their lives, they become props in his legend. Death here is entertainment, propaganda, and a recruitment poster all at once. But Noxus is not spiritually unified. Conquered peoples bring their own beliefs about what comes after. Some worship ancient spirits, others honour regional death gods, others fear the Shadow Isles or the Void. The Empire does not erase these afterlives, it absorbs them. So, within one Noxian cohort, you might have soldiers marching to war who expect to join ancestral halls, others who fear becoming wandering wraiths, and others who think nothing awaits them at all. Champions show you how varied these attitudes can be. Darius charges forward with absolute fearlessness. For him, dying on the front line is acceptable, as long as it proves Noxian dominance. Riven, by contrast, is haunted by the lives she took in Ionia. Her broken blade is a reminder that strength without purpose can turn every battlefield into a graveyard you carry in your mind. Swain transforms death into strategy. Ravens gather on corpses, and through them he harvests secrets from the dying. I'm only speculating here, but those souls, or at least their memories, do not seem to pass cleanly into any normal afterlife. In current times, that suggests some immensely powerful entities in Noxus may be quietly redirecting the dead, and that raises a disturbing question. If Swain's ravens are feeding him fragments of souls, where do those fragments ultimately go? Are they scattered into the spirit realm, locked inside Noxus's own hidden vault of ghosts, or funneled towards something even older than the Empire itself? The answer may lie with the beings in Runeterra who do not just watch death, but claim ownership over it. Dematia, Petricite, purity, and the silencing of souls. Those owners of death are not only spectral tyrants or cosmic entities, sometimes they are mortal kingdoms, and nowhere in Runeterra is that more true than Dematia. Dematia is a fortress nation carved quite literally out of fear of magic. Its gleaming walls, its proud monuments, even its prison cells are built from a pale, strange stone, petricite. So, how did a rock become one of the most powerful tools over death in this realm? Petricite is a rare mineral that does not channel magic. It drinks it. It absorbs spells, dampens enchantments, and turns grand displays of power into a dull, suffocated silence. Essentially, Dematia weaponized silence. In order to keep mages under control, they lined their cities and dungeons with petricite, forged shackles, and even weapons from it. To the outside world, this was purity and protection. To those born with magic, it was a slow erasure. When a mage is imprisoned in the gallows or the Magiseeker's cells, their power is constantly leached away into the stone. And when that mage dies there, the question becomes chilling. Is their soul leaving whole, or has something vital already been drained? Silas is your clearest window into that system. As a child, he could sense magic in others, and Demacia locked him in petricite chains for years. Those chains did not just restrain his body, they fed on his power until he learned to reverse the flow and tear spells out of the stone itself. His eventual escape and the Mage Rebellion exposed what Demacia's purity really meant. Generations of sorcerers executed or entombed in petricite, their deaths framed as necessary for the kingdom's safety. For many of them, death was not a tragic, cut-short destiny, but a release from a life where even breathing felt surveilled. Here is the pattern interrupt. Demacia, the shining refuge from magic, may be one of the darkest places to die if you have it. While Noxus throws you into war and the Shadow Isles tear at your soul, Demacia simply turns the volume down on your very existence until there is almost nothing left to hear. This stands in sharp contrast to families like the Crown Guards. Garen, the exemplar soldier, believes in honourable death on the battlefield, body returned to the soil of a just kingdom. Lux, secretly a mage, is caught between that ideal and the knowledge that her own pure death could have been in a silent cell, her light smothered by petricite. Their family embodies the official story of Demacia, sacrifice, duty, clean endings, while hiding the buried reality of mages whose passing is anything but clean. I'm only speculating here, but if petricite can strip and store magic, it may also interfere with the usual routes souls take after death. Could a mage who dies, bound in petricite, find their spirit weakened, unable to reach the spirit realm fully? Could fragments of them remain faintly imprinted in the stone, the way Silas later draws spells from it? In current times, Demacia stands proud under its white walls, yet those walls might be lined with the thinnest echoes of the very people it tried to erase. And if petricite can cage magic even beyond death, then the next place we visit, a land built on an entire catastrophe of trapped souls, shows what happens when that principle is taken to an apocalyptic scale. Piltover and Zon, Chemtech, Hextech, and manufactured afterlives. Piltover and Zon take that catastrophe of trapped souls and ask a different question. Why wait for an afterlife at all when you can engineer one in a lab? In these twin cities, death is not a boundary. It's a design problem. Piltover's Hextech revolution begins as a promise. Refined crystals, harnessed arcane currents, an elegant fusion of science and magic that lets mortals channel immensely powerful forces without years of training. So, how did that change what it means to die? When you can store energy in a gemstone, the next step is obvious. Store a person, or at least the parts of them that are useful. Beneath Piltover's shining bridges, Zon answers that promise with Chemtech. Toxic alchemy, volatile reagents, and industrial runoff seep into the Undercity, creating a realm where survival itself becomes an experiment. Chem barons and rogue scientists learn that with the right cocktail, you can keep organs pumping long after the body should fail, or replace those organs entirely. In order to keep labourers on the line, enforcers on the streets, or soldiers on the front, death is pushed back, sliced up, and repackaged. Essentially, Chemtech can turn a corpse into infrastructure. Singed is the clearest embodiment of this philosophy. He treats mortality as a variable to remove, not respect. His experiments stretch bodies past natural limits, stitching flesh to tubes, vats, and tanks, creating beings that breathe poison or never need to sleep. I'm only speculating here, but for many of his test subjects, there may never be a clear moment of death, just a slow erosion of identity as chemicals overwrite what was once human. Warwick shows another fate, Once a man, he's remade by singed into a chem-fueled predator whose heart is powered by volatile vials. He can survive wounds that would kill any normal being, regenerating through pain and rage. Is that still a life, or a weapon that merely remembers being alive? In current times, Warwick roams Zahn's alleys as living proof that in this part of the world, your end can be re-engineered into someone else's tool. Piltover's answer leans more mechanical than chemical. Victor envisions a glorious evolution where fragile flesh is replaced with perfected steel. His own body becomes a prototype. Limbs, organs, even parts of his brain gradually mechanized. If your consciousness persists in a Hextech frame, have you dodged death or just traded one mortal shell for another? And if that frame can be repaired indefinitely, when does your story actually end? Then there is Urgot, a brutal hybrid of Noxian executioner and Zornite machinery. Dismembered and reassembled into a walking slaughterhouse, his body is a prison of chains, saws, and grafted armour. He can be blown apart and bolted back together. For him, death is no longer release, it's maintenance. In Piltover and Zahn, bodies, brains, and even pain are raw materials. Death is mined, refined, and weaponized rather than mourned. So, which is worse? A chemtech monstrosity that can't truly die, or a soul trapped in Thresh's lantern, perfectly aware yet powerless? And in a world where both are possible, who gets to decide which fate you deserve? Zahn's lost and forgotten, when no one notices you dying. But there's another answer to that question. In Piltover's glittering towers, death is engineered. In Zahn's depths, it's an accident, an afterthought. You move from chem-fogged alley to rusted catwalk, and the realm itself feels unstable. Pipes groan, bridges sway. The air is a permanent bruise of green and grey. Every day, scaffolds collapse, vats rupture, and whole workshops vanish into sinkholes. No records, no reports, just more dust in the sump. So, how did this become normal? Essentially, Piltover's progress has a pressure valve, and that valve is Zahn. In order to keep the upper city clean and immensely profitable, waste, physical and human, flows downward. Undercity mortals breathe toxins from ancient, unregulated plants. Children grow up counting which friends didn't come back from a shift, not which ones did. You see this most clearly around the champions you already know. Echo's gang in Arcane treats death as background noise. A misstep on a broken walkway, a stray bullet during a deal, a chem explosion in a workshop. These are not rare tragedies, they're constants. Jinx grows up in a world where a bridge collapsing under a protest is just another headline no one will read. The Firelight kids skim over the tops of all this, literally gliding past memorials that never existed, because there were never graves, never rituals, never time. In Runeterra, belief shapes afterlives, Vastayan spirit traditions, Ionian rites, the Blessed Isle's old doctrines. These give souls a path. But what happens when no one believes you mattered in the first place? When a Zornite falls into the chem lakes and dissolves before anyone notices, does their spirit still find Kindred's arrow or Lamb's embrace? Or does it drift through a realm already choked with fumes and forgotten names? I'm only speculating here, but Zahn's unique environment might twist more than lungs and metal. Areas saturated with chemtech and shimmer are bathed in unstable magic. We've seen shimmer alter bodies and minds. Why wouldn't it stain spirits too? A soul torn from a body mid-overdose in a shimmer den could leave a psychic after-image, a flicker of desperate craving that never resolves. A factory where dozens die in repeated accidents might accumulate a residue of fear, an unseen pressure that drives the next foreman to cut one more corner. Essentially, these places could grow their own silent, local afterlives. Not organised realms ruled by powerful entities, but pockets of warped emotion, echoes of children running across catwalks that no longer exist, the sound of coughing in an empty corridor, the feeling of being watched in a room where everyone died on the night shift. In current times, you don't hear stories of great Zornite ghosts reshaping history. You hear about missing workers, about families who never even get a body, and that might be the most chilling fate Runeterra offers, not torment in the Shadow Isles, not endless undeath in chem armour, but to die in a place where your death is just another leak in the pipes, noticed, patched over, and then forgotten. Because if no one remembers you, what exactly is left to cross into any afterlife at all? Ixtal and the elemental lattice, death in a hidden empire. If Zorn is a place where deaths vanish into the machinery, Ixtal is the opposite, a realm where every death is part of an immense, deliberate design. Hidden in the deep jungles of eastern Runeterra, Ixtal presents itself as a backwater. In reality, it is an immensely advanced elemental civilization, descended from the old ascendant cultures that once mastered true world-shaping magic. So, how did that history change the way they think about dying? Essentially by convincing them that they, not anyone else, are the rightful heirs to ancient magical knowledge, and that even death should obey their rules. Ixtali mages don't just cast spells, they see reality itself as an elemental lattice, a vast invisible framework woven from earth, water, air and fire, with subtler strands of growth and decay. In order to understand death in Ixtal, you have to understand this lattice. Life is an arrangement of elements in temporary harmony. Death is not an ending, but a reconfiguration, a forced rebalancing when that pattern can no longer be maintained. So when someone dies in Ixtal, the question is not, where did the soul go, but how are its elements being reassigned? Their rituals guide the body back into earth and water. Their songs and sigils disperse breath and heat into air and fire. To an outsider, this looks like respectful burial. To an Ixtali geomancer, it is precision work on a living equation. Kiana, Empress of the Elements, is the clearest example of this mindset. She doesn't just bend rivers and stone out of raw ambition. She believes the lattice is hers to command, and that those who cannot control nature are unworthy of its gifts, including their own lives. When she cuts down a rival, that death is, in her eyes, a correction. The lattice is being pruned, the weak pattern removed so stronger ones can flourish. Other Ixtali leaders and elementalists share this quiet severity. Power over nature implies power over the cycle of life and death. I'm only speculating here, but Ixtal's deep elemental magic almost certainly allows stranger fates than simple burial. Imagine a master of water and growth binding a dying hunter's essence into the jungle canopy, so his awareness thins out into every leaf and raindrop, or an earth mage preserving a lineage by anchoring fragments of ancestral memory into crystalline formations beneath their cities, creating a sort of elemental archive rather than a conventional afterlife. Could there be reincorporation where a soul's elemental pattern is carefully rewoven into a newborn body, or even into a crafted elemental construct? In current times, we don't have explicit proof, but the sophistication of Ixtal's magic and its roots in pre-Rune Wars knowledge suggests that if any mortal civilization can engineer an elemental afterlife, it would be them. And that makes Ixtal a wild card. Their empire is secretive, their jungles almost impenetrable, and their scholars do not share what they know. We have no idea how many souls have been redirected, preserved, or weaponized inside that lattice, for good or ill. If other regions fear demons, the Void or the Shadow Isles, they may be overlooking a quieter possibility, a hidden empire that has already rewritten what death means and simply chosen not to tell the rest of the world. Because if one mortal nation can reshape the rules of dying, what happens when other powers try to do the same? Bandle paths, spirit roads, how souls travel across Runeterra. If mortals can rewrite the rules of dying, then somewhere those new rules have to plug into the old system. Runeterra is not just a patchwork of isolated afterlives. It is crossed by invisible roads. Souls do not simply vanish. They travel. These are the spirit roads and hidden paths of the world. So, how did this unseen infrastructure form? When the ancient entities split reality into physical and spirit realms, the boundary did not become a solid wall. It became a membrane threaded with channels where magic, memories, and eventually the dead could flow. In current times, you see the symptoms: a harrowing in Bilgewater, a haunting in Demacia, a vision on Targon. Underneath, the same currents are moving. Bandle paths are the most obvious cracks in that membrane. To you, they are whimsical yordle portals that open from an alley in Piltover to a forest in Ionia. To a wandering soul, they are far more dangerous. Essentially, any tear that lets a yordle step between realms is also a stress point in the routes souls follow. A confused spirit near a bandle portal might be tugged sideways, delayed, or dropped somewhere it was never meant to be. This helps explain why yordles often stumble into ghosts and why time and memory warp around them. Ionia and the borders of the Shadow Isles show what happens when those roads are oversaturated. In order to keep balance, Ionian monasteries and the Kinku Order watch over spirit ways that braid through forests and rivers. When Noxian war and the Ruination's echoes collide with that network, souls can snag on battlefields or be swept toward the black mist instead of gentler destinations. On the Shadow Isle's edges, where the Blessed Isle's old sanctity still clings to broken stone, spirit roads twist. Some dead are claimed by Thresher's lantern, others simply wander, unable to find the exit. Across all of this, kindred are the constant. Lamb and wolf are not bound to a single nation or even a single realm. Wherever death occurs, they appear, stepping between bandle paths, spirit roads, and even Targonian channels, as if all of it were one map only they can read. To a mortal, it looks random. To them, it is a hunt along well-known trails. Targonian channels add a vertical layer to this network. Celestial power pours down through Mount Targon, carving high, bright avenues in the spirit realm. Ascended aspects, fallen hosts, even echoes of battles on the mountain all leave impressions in those routes. I'm only speculating here, but when an aspect chooses a host, it may be reading those channels to find a soul already aligned to its purpose. Now, what happens when something breaks the roads themselves? The Ruination did not only corrupt the Blessed Isles, it likely shattered local spirit routes, forcing souls into the Black Mist's orbit. Void incursions threaten something even worse, erasure of the path entirely, so there is nowhere for a soul to go. That could be why regions touched by the void or the mist report more hauntings, more anomalies, more dead that refuse to move on. Taken together, Shriman tomb rites, Freljordian oaths, Targonian ascension, Ionian balance, Noxian war deaths, and Bandle's portals are not separate systems. They are junctions on one immensely complex transit grid of dying. And if the roads are this intricate, then the next question is obvious. Who besides kindred is trying to control the traffic? Demons and fear, when your emotions decide your afterlife. And the answer is far more than you'd expect. Those junctions of dying are not just roads, they are hunting grounds. Because beyond kindred, there is another category of immensely powerful entities watching the traffic, demons. Essentially, these are not fallen angels or random monsters. They are living embodiments of single, overwhelming emotions that exist across the spirit realm of Runeterra. Fear has a shape. Pain has a voice. Obsession, hunger, despair, each of these can wake up, grow teeth, and start walking. So how did mortals first meet them? Probably the same way you still do in current times, by feeling something too strongly, at the worst possible moment. Fiddlesticks is the clearest example. This ancient horror is not just a scarecrow with a scythe. It is fear itself, congealed around an old, forgotten cage in a ruined Noxian borderland. It doesn't simply kill intruders. It engineers their final minutes, feeding them their own voices, their own memories, until terror is all that's left. In order to maximize that terror, Fiddlesticks plays with sequence. First, separation from allies. Then, impossible sounds in the dark. Then, the unmistakable realization that something is hunting you, and that no prayer, no magic, no empire can help. By the time its victims finally die, their souls are saturated with fear. I'm only speculating here, but the lore strongly implies that this emotional concentration is what the demon is really after, more than the bodies themselves. Other demons follow the same rule with different flavours. Evelyn is pain and ecstasy twisted together, stalking lovers' bedrooms and war-torn alleys, coaxing mortals into ever more intense suffering just to feel her presence. A demon of obsession might coil around a researcher in Piltover, pushing them past sanity in the final hours before an experiment explodes. When those mortals die in a peak of terror, despair, or rapture, the demon's attention doesn't end with the heartbeat. It extends into whatever comes after. This is where the afterlife gets distorted. Instead of moving cleanly toward the Shadow Isles, a spiritual plane, or Kindred's embrace, a soul that dies in an extreme emotional spike can be hooked, reeled in, and partially claimed. Demons can imprint on that final feeling, creating lingering echoes that wander battlefields, replaying the same last scream. Sometimes they go further, shaping puppets, spirit husks made from memory and emotion, which wear a victim's voice but answer only to their tormentor. From the outside, those puppets blur categories. Are they ghosts? Are they just memories? Or are they a form of ongoing suffering, stretched out indefinitely for a demon's amusement and sustenance? In current times, when you hear about haunted trenches, cursed love nests, or villages that vanish after seeing the scarecrow, you are often hearing about these emotional leftovers, not natural hauntings. And that leads to a brutal question. If your final emotions are this decisive, how many people in Runeterra, in their last terrified seconds, accidentally doom themselves to a demonic afterlife they never even knew existed? Kindred's hunt, the normal death. Most people never get. So what happens if nothing goes wrong? If no demon hooks your fear, no black mist rolls in, no void rift opens under your feet? In that rare, merciful case, Runeterra hands you over to the one constant of this world, Kindred. Kindred is not a single being, but a twin aspect of death itself, lamb and wolf. In an ordinary, uncorrupted death, they arrive together at the edge of your awareness. You don't see a cosmic courtroom or a Shadow Isles chain. You see a white mask, a bow drawn with calm precision, and somewhere just out of sight, the heavy breath of a hunter in the dark. Lamb offers you a choice that is barely a choice at all. Stand. Accept the arrow. Die where you are with a single painless shot that severs body from soul. Those who listen pass swiftly beyond mortal reach into a realm that even spirit walkers and necromancers cannot reliably map. Essentially, this is the clean handoff. Your story ends, and whatever lies after is outside Runeterra's turbulent magic and politics. But what if you run? Then Wolf takes interest. He is the chase, the terror, the death you try to outpace. In tales from Damatian farmsteads to Noxian barracks, People whisper about footsteps behind the doomed and teeth closing on those who flee their fate. The end result is the same soul severing, but the journey is violent, messy, and filled with fear. I'm only speculating here, but this may explain why so many ghost stories emphasize the moment of panic more than the moment of passing. This is what most people should get. Peasants who never see a mage, soldiers who die before the black mist reaches the trench, zoonite workers who collapse before Chemtech can reanimate them. If nothing interferes, their deaths are lamb's arrow or wolf's jaws, and then silence. No eternal battlefield, no cursed island, no endless hunger. So, how did death become so complicated? In order to corrupt this baseline, immensely powerful entities and disasters have to intercept the soul. The Ruination's black mist drags spirits sideways into the Shadow Isles, where Thresh and Hecarim twist them into wraiths. The void doesn't let kindred escort you anywhere, it unravels you into nothing. Ascension for Shuriman god warriors, Targon's aspects descending into hosts, Chemtech abominations in Zon, demons binding themselves to trauma, Ionian spirits tangling with mortal identities. All of these are detours from the simple lamb and wolf ending. Yet even gods, kings and monsters are only delaying a meeting. Mordekaiser forges his own death realm, but kindred waits at the edges of his inevitable fall. Aspects burn through hosts. When the starfire goes out, death is still there. Darken locked-in weapons, ruined kings, void-touched champions. None of them are truly beyond notice, only postponed or diverted. In current times, this makes kindred the measuring stick. Normal death is their hunt. Everything else in Runeterra's afterlives, Shadow Isles, Void Oblivion, Demon Bargains, Celestial Rebirth, is defined by how far it pulls you away from that final simple arrow. Modern conflicts, how today's wars, rewrite tomorrow's afterlives. In current times, that simple arrow is hitting fewer and fewer people. Modern wars in Runeterra don't just redraw borders, they reroute souls. Every battlefield is an argument over who owns death itself. Take the Noxus-Ionia conflict. On paper, it is conquest versus tradition. Spiritually, it is a collision of realms. Noxian soldiers march in with a culture that treats death as the cost of strength. But when they fall on Ionian soil, surrounded by wild magic and ancient groves, their spirits can be pulled into the local ecosystem of ghosts and kami. So, how did a boy from the immortal bastion end up as a whispering forest shade in Navori? Because the land itself, and the entities bound to it, often overrule the empire stamped on your armour. Demacia's mage rebellion shows a different kind of metaphysical warfare. Petricite doesn't only dampen spells, it drinks them. When a mage dies in a Petricite-lined cell, or on the gallows in the capital, there are hints their soul is muted, dimmed, or even partially absorbed. Essentially, their afterlife can be amputated before it begins. In order to keep Demacia pure, the state may be quietly erasing the loudest echoes of its victims from the spirit realm. I'm only speculating here, but what happens if thousands of silenced souls start to accumulate in the stone itself? Piltover and Zon fight a slower industrial war. Exploding hextech, chemtech plagues, collapsing undercity bridges, these deaths are messy. Some victims are shredded so thoroughly by unstable magic that demons of fear or addiction can latch on in their final moments. Others, dissolved in the sump or fed to Chem Baron's machines, risk something closer to void-style oblivion, where there is barely a self left for kindred to find. Progress in this world is literally grinding the boundary between life and afterlife. On the seas, Bilgewater's struggle with the Shadow Isles turns every harrowing into a spiritual lottery. Die within the reach of the black mist, and you might awaken as a wraith, a lantern-trapped soul, or a mindless spectral infantryman in Viego's old armies. die under the protection of Nagakaburos and Ilaoi's rights, and you are pushed onward, refuse the stagnation of undeath. Two immensely powerful systems, ceaseless motion versus frozen ruin, compete over the same drowned sailors. Even the Freljord's tribal wars are really about future armies, warriors who fall for Avarosan unity, Winter's Claw fury, or the Frostguard's secret bargains may wake to very different calls, ancestral halls, howling blizzards, or the cold dreams of the Watchers. Leaders from Swain to Viego understand this. Swain harvests ravens and memories from the dead to steer Noxus. Viego, during the Sentinels' crisis, tried to rewrite death entirely by pulling Isolde and everyone else back through the black mist. And if any one faction ever does to death what the Ruination almost did, then the next war won't just decide who rules Runeterra's map, but who rewrites its entire afterlife. So who exactly is already trying to do that in secret? Cosmic Scale, Aurelian Sol, Targon, and who owns your soul? To answer that, you have to zoom out far beyond Noxus, beyond the Shadow Isles, beyond even Runeterra's sky. Because above all these regional struggles sits something else, the Celestials and the dragon who forges their playground. Aurelian Sol is not a god of death. He is the thing that makes gods possible. He forged stars, shaped galaxies, and in doing so helped define the basic rules any realm has to follow: time, gravity, birth, and yes, the possibility of endings. So, how did Runeterra's chaotic patchwork of afterlives, our ever-pass inspection from a being that crafts suns as casually as mortals light campfires? The answer is that to him, mortal souls are barely a flicker in the glare of a constellation. Around that dragon's work orbit the Celestials and aspects of Targon. These are star-forged entities, fragments of cosmic intent wearing mortal bodies. The aspect of war, the aspect of the Protector, the aspect of Twilight, each one is a lens through which the universe focuses immense power into the world. Essentially, when someone on Mount Targon ascends, they are not just blessed, they are overwritten by a higher priority process in the cosmic system. From that vantage point, one human soul lost to the black mist, or bound in a darkin weapon, is almost nothing, but not completely nothing. In order to maintain the broader balance of creation, Celestials do intervene when patterns threaten the structure of reality itself. A ruination that destabilizes a world rune and floods entire continents with undeath. A void breach in the Freljord that could unmake matter and memory. Those are the kinds of alarms that might reach all the way up to the stars. You can see hints of this in Targon's history. The aspects helped build Shurima's sun disk, shaping who could ascend and how far mortals could push their defiance of death. They watch the void, they watch the Shadow Isles, and they watch beings like Mordekaiser, who is trying to write his own private patch into the code of the afterlife. I'm only speculating here, but if Mordekaiser ever truly chained every soul into his realm, that would be less a regional crisis and more a cosmic bug report. Pattern interrupt. What if even the Celestials have a ceiling? There are scattered hints that beyond the spirit realm, beyond the void, beyond any god-forged afterlife, there may be a final destination, a rule all entities must respect. Even kindred, embodiments of death itself, never claim to own what happens after their arrow lands or their lamb song fades. Demons feed on Vir, not on whatever lies past the last heartbeat. In current times, that makes Runeterra feel like a monitored experiment. Its death systems are fragmented, overlapping, sometimes horrifying, but still tolerated. As long as the world remains mostly stable, the dragon keeps forging, the stars keep burning, and the aspects keep their distance. But if another Ruination-scale disaster, or a true void incursion, threatens the underlying laws of life and death, then the next intervention might not be a mortal hero or a regional empire. It might be the sky itself reaching down to reset the board. So if that happens, what does dying in Runeterra even mean anymore? Edge cases, champions who broke death completely. If the sky itself can reset the board, some pieces still refuse to leave it. In Runeterra, a few champions don't just die, they vandalize the entire concept of death. Start with Noxus and its favourite corpse, Scion, once an immensely powerful war hero who personally killed a Damatian king. Sion's death should have been the end of a brutal legend. So how did Noxus respond? They dug him up. Through brutal necromancy and blood rituals, Noxian war mages dragged his soul back and nailed it into his own decaying body. Essentially, Sion is a walking siege engine whose mind is shattered, whose flesh constantly rots, and whose only stable emotion is rage. In order to control him, handlers brand him with commands and war banners, but his memories bleed through in broken flashes. He remembers glory, he remembers killing Jarvan the First, but not who he has become. This isn't a normal undeath where a spirit lingers. It's a forced, weaponized half-life where a nation has turned a hero's legacy into an eternal engine of terror. Now shift to someone who refused every existing afterlife and built his own. Mordekaiser, the ancient warlord of the immortal Bastion, was so obsessed with dominion that even dying was just a logistical problem. When his enemies finally killed him, his soul did not pass into the Shadow Isle's black mist or into any peaceful realm. Instead, through forbidden magic and sheer will, he hammered out a new plane, the realm of death. There he enslaves the souls of his victims, forges them into an army, and studies the underlying rules of mortality. I'm only speculating here, but Mordekaiser is probably the closest any mortal-born entity has come to editing the cosmic rulebook. His long-term plan is to use that captive realm as a staging ground, return to the physical world and weld the living and the dead into a single empire. Against that cold tyranny, Yorick looks almost humble. He is one of the last survivors of the Blessed Isle's original priesthood, now wandering the ruined Shadow Isles with a shovel of holy relic stone. His role is not to hoard souls, but to shepherd them. He carries the final echoes of Helia's death rites, guiding spirits to rest, separating the lost from the predatory black mist, and honouring the ancient balance between realms. In current times, Yorick is a walking archive of a gentler philosophy of death that the Ruination nearly erased. Then there is Gwen, who breaks every pattern. She was never a living woman. She was a doll crafted by Isolde, Viego's queen, infused later with Isolde's lingering essence and memories. When the Ruination's magic surged through Camavoran relics, that bond of memory and craftsmanship became a bridge. Gwen awakened as a soul-bound construct, her scissors and thread carrying sanctified hallowed mist. So, how did death work for Gwen? It didn't. Her afterlife emerged from love, artistry, and remembrance rather than flesh or traditional spirit. She is proof that in Runeterra, identity can reassemble around what someone made and what they meant, not just where their soul drifted. Taken together, these 4 cases show something crucial. Sion's a rage-bound corpse, Mordekaiser's private afterlife realm, Yorick's half-remembered priesthood, and Gwen's stitched soul all carve out entirely new categories of existence beyond the grave. Death is still a transition, but for the most powerful or the most symbolically charged, it can also be a promotion, a prison, or a second draft. And if individuals can twist death this far, what happens when whole cultures start engineering their own versions of the afterlife? Unresolved threats, Watchers, Void, Ruination, what's still coming? And if individuals can twist death this far, What happens when whole cultures start engineering their own versions of the afterlife? In Runeterra, the really unsettling part is that the biggest experiments haven't even finished yet. They're still warming up. Beneath the Freljord, the Watchers are the first ticking time bomb. These are not just voidborn monsters. They are ancient, immensely powerful entities that predate almost every mortal story. So, how did they end up trapped under miles of enchanted ice? Lysandra and her sisters bargained with them, then betrayed them, freezing their vast bodies mid-emergence. Essentially, the Freljord's glaciers are the lid on a cosmic grave that refuses to stay closed. If that ice fails, you don't just die, you risk being rewritten into void matter, memories, and souls stripped away until you are a moving extension of an alien will. The Void's version of afterlife is closer to deletion than to undeath. When a Shuriman soldier falls to a void rift, there is no ghost, no spirit realm echo. There is only consumption. In order to understand how different that is, you can compare it to the ruination. The black mist doesn't erase you, it drags you out. It tears souls from graves, from oceans, from peaceful barrows in Demacia and Ionia, and forces them into a half-existence bound to Shadow Isle's magic. Even after Viego's defeat, in current times, the ruination did not simply switch off. The mist still seeps from the shattered Helia, prowling coasts during the harrowing. Thresh still harvests, Hecarim still rides, and Yorick still shepherds lost spirits through a realm his own people accidentally poisoned. So, how did that change death? A farmer in Bilgewater no longer trusts that burial means rest. There is always a chance the next harrowing will rip their soul back into the world as an unwilling participant in someone else's tragedy. Layered on top of this is Mordekaiser's project. When Sanuzal died, he refused all existing paths and built his own realm of death, a metallic necropolis where the strongest souls are forged into his legions. I'm only speculating here, but if he succeeds in expanding this realm, he could intercept souls that would have gone to the Shadow Isles, to spiritual afterlives in Ionia, even to Targonian celestial cycles. Imagine every death on the battlefield feeding a single emperor of oblivion. And while all of that simmers, demons hunt in the background. They are not bound to one island or one catastrophe. They feed on fear, obsession, pain, and war. Fiddlesticks in a Demacian field, Evelyn in a Noxian court, lesser names lurking in Zon's alleys. Each new conflict, each Chemtech disaster, each invasion gives them more raw emotion to shape into contracts and cages. Essentially, Runeterra's afterlives are sitting under 4 pressure points: the Watcher's prison, the lingering ruination, Mordekaiser's realm, and a rising tide of demonic predation. Any one of these could redefine what dead means for mortals across the world. What happens if 2 or 3 go off at once? Putting it all together, your personal death in Runeterra. So what does all of this actually mean for you? In order to make sense of Runeterra's afterlives, imagine you're not a spectator anymore. You're a citizen, born in one region, dying in another, caught between immensely powerful entities that all disagree on what should happen to your soul. Start in Demacia. You grow up under Patrisite towers that mute magic, fearing mages and demons more than death itself. If you die peacefully in a village surrounded by family, your emotions settle. In that quiet acceptance, Kindred's lamb is the one who finds you, and you pass into a calm, undefined spirit realm beyond mortal wars. But if you're a hidden mage executed by the mage seekers, terror and injustice cling to you. I'm only speculating here, but that kind of death might draw a demon of despair, or leave you wandering, unable to move on because the very stone around you has smothered the pathways of magic. Shift to Noxus. In current times, you probably die on campaign, trampled in the mud under a banner of conquest. Your last thoughts are pride, fury, or betrayal. On an ordinary battlefield, Kindred's wolf might claim you mid-charge, honouring that violent end. Yet if the black mist rolls in from the Shadow Isles during a harrowing, those same emotions become chains. You rise as a spectral soldier pressed into an endless war under Thresh's keys or Hecarim's hooves, your identity slowly stripped away. Now picture Ionia, where the veil between realms is thin. A monk dying in a forest shrine at peace is gently guided into the spirit wilds, joining the local kami and ancestors. Essentially, the land itself remembers you. But if you fall during a Noxian invasion, surrounded by burning groves and screaming spirits, that imbalance can twist your soul. You might become a vengeful shade, or be redirected by the Kinku into a more ordered spirit path if they reach you in time. Travel to Bilgewater. A sailor lost at sea in a normal storm sinks into Nagakaburos' endless motion, your essence recycled into the great cycle of change. Die during the harrowing, though, and the black mist seizes you instead, dragging you toward the Shadow Isles. The same ocean becomes a conduit to Helia's ruined vaults and Mordekaiser's ambitions. Finally, Shurima and Targon. A Shuriman dying in the desert might simply pass on, unless a Darkin weapon, an Ascended, or a Void Rift is nearby. Targonian aspirants who perish during a ritual can be overwritten by an aspect, their mortal afterlife replaced by a cosmic duty. If the void consumes you in Icathia's ruins, there is no spirit journey at all, only erasure. So, how did one world end up with such different fates for the same act of dying? Location, cause, emotion, and nearby magic all intersect, turning your personal death into a crossroads between Kindred's mercy, demonic contracts, black mist slavery, void annihilation, or celestial recruitment. The next question is, who, if anyone, is actually in control of that chaos? Final recap. The rules of dying in Runeterra, as we know them. So, how did anyone manage to find structure inside that chaos? In order to finish this tour of death in Runeterra, you need a clear baseline, then the major ways reality cheats. Essentially, the default rule is still Kindred. Lamb offers a clean, almost gentle passing, while Wolf hunts those who run from it. For the overwhelming majority of mortals in every region, death means the soul separates from the body, encounters Kindred in some form, and then passes beyond the known spirit realm into a destination even most powerful entities cannot see. Unless something interferes, you're here, then you're gone. The story only gets strange when something intercepts that journey. The Shadow Isles' black mist grabs souls and memories, binding them into wraiths, spectres, and lich kings. Thresh, Callista, Hecarim, Viego, even Gwen are all examples of what happens when Helia's ruination overrides Kindred and chains you to an undead echo. Mordekaiser represents a different theft. His soul-forged realm drags the dead into his iron kingdom, turning afterlife into conscription. If the mist is corrosion, Mordekaiser is conquest. Void annihilation is harsher. Being consumed by the void as seen in Icathia's fall, or the Watcher's influence in the Freljord, does not create ghosts. It erases memories, identity, even the spiritual pattern that Kindred would reap can be unravelled into nothing or rewritten into void spawn. I'm only speculating here, but this might be the one fate that even Lamb and Wolf simply cannot reach. Celestial and ascended paths rewrite the rules instead of breaking them. Targon's aspects treat mortal bodies as vessels. When a host dies, the aspect persists, sometimes returning, sometimes withdrawing to a higher realm. Shuriman Ascension burns a soul into a radiant, semi-immortal form. When those god warriors die, they do not follow normal mortal routes, which is why Darkin weapons still whisper with trapped, twisted consciousness. Other regions bend death more quietly. Ionian spirit entanglement means strong emotions, and dense magic can leave behind animated forests, angry river spirits, or lingering ancestors, especially after the Noxian invasion tore the balance. Damatian Petricite, by contrast, mutes magic so thoroughly that mages can die with their power sealed, their spiritual imprint weakened or redirected. Piltover and Zaun introduce engineered detours, chemtech resurrections, hextech stored minds, and bodies rebuilt in laboratories all interfere with when and how kindred arrive. Demons are wild cards throughout this world. Contracts with beings like Evelyn or Fiddlesticks can stretch suffering beyond death or devour fear itself. In current times, we also know there are unknown demons, hidden Ixtali rites that may recycle souls through elemental trials, and Yordle metaphysics where death barely applies, as Bandle City sits half outside normal time. So, how did all of this leave you? With a top-down map. Most die through kindred. Some are stolen by mist, void, aspects, ascension, spirits, petricite, technology, demons, or Mordekaiser. The remaining mystery is not whether there are rules, but which hidden system you fall into next, and that's what we'll confront in the final section. Utro, where do we go next in Runeterra's lore? So, how did all of this leave you? With rules, loopholes, and a question you can actually answer. If you had to exist under one of Runeterra's afterlife systems, which realm would you choose to fall into? Would you rather trust the peaceful inevitability of kindred, knowing the lamb and the wolf will find you when your story is truly finished? Or would you prefer to drift as an Ionian spirit, woven into a forest shrine, a family altar, or a Kinku balance ritual, where mortals still speak your name? Maybe you'd gamble on the Targonian aspects, hoping a celestial entity descends and rewrites your fate into something immensely powerful and star-bound. Or, and this is where it turns darker, would you willingly risk the Black Mist, a demon's bargain, or even Mordekaiser's iron afterlife in order to hold on to more power? Tell me in the comments which system you'd live under and why. In order to keep following these paths beyond death, there are some natural next steps. If the Shadow Isles and the Black Mist fascinated you, the obvious follow-up is a full ruination timeline. From the Blessed Isles to Viego to the harrowing in Bilgewater, to what it means when Thresh or Callista claim a soul. If you were more terrified of being erased than haunted, then a deep dive into the Void's history. Icathia, the Watchers, the frozen abyss beneath the Freljor, might be the one you want next. Essentially, every category of soul hunter we touched on could be its own catalogue. Demons from Fiddlesticks to Evelyn, region by region funeral customs, from Noxian war pyres to Damatian Petricite tombs, Shuriman ascension rituals, even how Yordles in Bandle City treat mortality when time barely applies to them. I'm only speculating here, but a focused episode on how Piltover, Zaun, and Chemtech quietly change what happens to bodies and spirits would reveal an entirely different layer of this world. In current times, Riot's lore is still moving. New champions arrive with their own bargains, curses, and visions of the beyond. Events revisit old disasters. Cinematics show us what the Black Mist or Celestial Realms actually feel like, and sometimes a single short story quietly rewrites an ancient rule of death we thought was settled. So, if you re-watch this video a year from now, some systems may have evolved, gained exceptions, or collided with each other in ways we can't fully see yet. That is why this breakdown is meant to be a reference, not just a one-time tour. Any time a new story mentions a soul, a resurrection, a funeral, or a spirit realm, you can pause through the relevant segment here and map where that scene fits. Kindred's hunt, a regional tradition, a demon's influence, or one of the great cosmic entities intervening. And remember, in Runeterra, no story is truly over at death. Gods return, ghosts linger, weapons whisper, and even the void keeps what it consumes. If you want to keep following those stories past the point where mortals should stop, subscribe, like, and stay with the channel, so the next time someone dies in this world, you already know what might be waiting on the other side.